Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, we are talking about adopting a service-based approach to business. It's a mindset and a strategy that is gaining traction in more industries. Some are still in the early stages, while others, like software, are 90% service-led already. This episode is sponsored by Binary Stream, a global solution provider for Microsoft Dynamics ERPs. And my guest, Binary Stream's head of marketing, Khaled Nassra, helps us unpack some of the reasons why subscription-based business models are doing so well, growing many times faster than their traditional counterparts overall. Whether businesses are adopting pure service models or a product and service hybrid, we wanted to understand more about the new ways of delivering value, and Khaled shares perspective on both the models that are working in B2B and some of the research that Binary Stream has done on the emergence of fractional ownership. And he offers his view on why he believes Microsoft is ideally positioned to lead in this space, both with its partners and its own technology. Khaled Nassra, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. I wanted to start by maybe sort of setting the scene for our listeners. We're talking about X as a service or a service-based approach to business. How do you describe this outlook?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually something that we've been doing for the past 15 years. But in the past 5 or so years, we're seeing a lot of companies across many different industries move to a service-oriented model where they have subscriptions attached to their services. You can think of solutions, and that's really software space is where it all started with XaaS. And then we're now seeing this grow more and more across many different industries like automobiles. Like in British Columbia, Canada, here we have a lot of car rentals where you can share the car, pay for it as a subscription, and then also add your usage-based payments. And that's something that is really cool to see spread across all the different industries, because as Binary Stream, we are seeing the benefits that our customers get when they move to a subscription-based model.
All right. Yeah, you mentioned a couple of examples there. Can you dive a little deeper into maybe what some of those concepts are and how they're really changing some of those businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we call it subscription management or like X as a service. But really, it goes beyond just the recurring kind of monthly gym subscription example. We're seeing companies get a lot more creative. And I mentioned the car share example, where they are blending a lot of different billing models. They have a monthly payments, they have an annual fee. So there you're getting 2 different frequencies. And then on top of that, they have usage, which is really one of the fastest growing areas, where you have a metered billing through things like IoT and being able to monitor the usage of your devices. That's growing really quite strongly. We see this even with construction manufacturers, where they're making sure that the rental fee for their construction equipment aligns properly with what the companies are using them for or renting them for. Same thing with cars, same thing with many different ones. And with software, that's really where a lot of the innovation has been happening, but even more excitingly, where companies have a blend of software and hardware, and they're renting out on a lease the hardware element while also adding any of the subscription software-oriented segments of their contracts.
So as businesses develop some of these new service-based models, they're also trying to meet the needs of their customers, whether it's consumer or business customers. How do you feel like they are sort of adapting to what the market actually wants as opposed to just ideas for a new service model?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're in a much more consumer-centric world today than we were a few years ago. And that is resulting in customers who are a lot more informed, customers who are demanding for a very tailor-made service to exactly what they need, because they have so much choice around them and everything is accessible. With cloud-based solutions, really that geographic territory does not even matter as much anymore. And to differentiate, you have to go to things like industry verticalization or to having more unique pricing models. And we can cast our mind back to like an Econ 101 kind of experiment, where you are thinking about how to segment your market. You can think of a movie theater that has cheaper prices on a Tuesday evening. Customers who are willing to go on a Tuesday evening will take that discounted price, while others might want to go on a Friday or a Saturday. And that's really exactly what's happening, only at a larger scale. Companies are segmenting their pricing and segmenting their markets and meeting customers, whether they are individual consumers or businesses, exactly where they need to be. And they can give them things like pay as you go, which really accommodates a more price and value conscious consumer, or they can give them something where it's a longer commitment, but they can get a discount. That's really the beauty of this model.
Interesting. How has Binary Stream been investigating or researching these kinds of models? What have you found so far?
So awesome findings for us. We're definitely seeing that in the subscription oriented models, companies are growing much, much faster. So we've been doing some research with Gartner and Microsoft, and we're finding that companies that do align with the subscription based model on average grow 4.6 times faster than traditional ones. And that's not a small number. And then with in software companies, we're seeing that 90% of new ones are subscription oriented. So not only that, but we're also working with our partner advisory committees and with our customers themselves and hearing from them what they need. So every day we're getting new requests for features into our subscription solutions. We're hearing from customers that have really complex business models that are all based on either charging a month early, charging a month late, and that's really their biggest differentiator. And you know what? The consumers are understanding that that's a differentiator and migrating to these new solutions because of the new billing model.
Interesting. Yeah. And it makes me think of, well, certain industries probably have a real legacy customer base and a legacy model where there's a lot of transition required versus maybe some of the ones I would think that you mentioned where organizations are growing the revenue much faster, perhaps are either newcomers to a space or perhaps even defining a space or redefining a space. I don't know. Do you have any insight onto that in terms of legacy transition versus new markets?
Absolutely. It's really one of the most fascinating things to come out of the past 2 years. You try to look at the silver lining and think about, well, how did the past couple of years push us towards a bit more innovation? And the one thing I can highlight is laggard industries like regulated industries like healthcare or finance are migrating and transforming quicker than ever before. But of course, with ones that are more adoptive of change, ones where there are a lot of maverick companies that are willing to try out new models would be more on the software side, on the computer side, because that is really our bread and butter is innovation. But I can think of companies in manufacturing that we have that are moving to a milestone based model. So if they manufacture something large, something that takes a couple of months, they're able to get more of the payment up front and then segment it. And that's a new billing model that wasn't as familiar for the manufacturing industry. For healthcare as well, we're seeing a lot of subscription oriented healthcare companies. There's examples like Pocket Pills, for example, where you can have the same dosage sent to you every month. You can have the same pill sent to you every month, and you just pay on a subscription basis. So a lot of these things are starting to seep into these more regulated, more laggard industries. But even with ones where you would think the transformation would be really arduous, like an education or one like healthcare I mentioned, the consumers might not be so responsive to change at first. But really, today, after 2 years of doing everything online, after 2 years of everything changing so quickly, the consumer appetite for change is much, much higher.
All right. Yeah, I can certainly see that. I wanted to maybe dive into some of the fundamentals that you're learning about or that you've been working on. For example, one of the elements that seems critical to these kinds of transitions is just having the ability to manage subscriptions, right? Do you want to talk about maybe that level of capabilities and maturing on just something like subscription or maybe some other sort of fundamental element of some of these new business models?
Yeah, I think the software is extremely important. And I should say we make a lot of the software that is supporting that motion. But what is even more important or equally important in many cases is building a roadmap for success that aligns with your corporate goals and corporate objectives, with where you sit in the market, with where your executive leadership is. And so to do that, companies really have to introspect and have a clear idea of what their transformation maturity is. We've built this transformation maturity scale for companies going from skeptics, beginners, emergent companies, advanced companies, and leaders who are a lot more innovative and disruptive and really are familiar with all the scalable technology there is. And you can't go to a company that is really skeptical about this transformation and try to push the most innovative thing ever, regardless of how awesome the technology is. We have to be aware that there's humans in these positions that do make the decisions. So we're talking more about how the executive suite sees this transformation, how we communicate this change. And that's why it's so wonderful for us to see the results that we did expect and then some in terms of success, in terms of customer retention, and then in terms of having a unified and seamless experience. So customers are asking for this, executives are responding, and operation teams are able to execute using all of these tools. So the tools are really a means to an end, but they do allow companies to transform their models, to think creatively about them. And that flexibility is empowering their growth more and more today.
So diving into maybe the organizational elements here of what goes into some of the service-focused transitions or changes that companies might be making. I can imagine that influence comes from various levels of a company. We talked a little about some of the executive responsibilities, and maybe you want to talk about that more, but I'm also curious about how people within an organization can maybe be advocates for some of these kinds of changes, or even develop some of the tactics or even some of the strategic elements that go into bringing services-focused mindset or services-focused execution to a company. Any other thoughts on some of those organizational details?
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. I think that's a really great question. And it's an insight that we're finding more with companies that are a bit on the edge. We're seeing companies that are being pushed forward by their CIOs, by their CFOs who have a grand plan for transformation. But oftentimes it's more practical reasons as well. A couple of years ago, we had two really huge accounting standards go into effect, IFRS 15 and AC 606, which did institute a lot of changes to revenue recognition. So with that, you can really imagine accounting clerks, controllers, people who are more on the line of business responsibilities for finance are pushing for that transformation because it's easier for them to have the structure, to have the software around it, and help resolve a lot of the issues they see. But one department that we often tend to neglect when we're talking about this topic is customer success. And that entire department is really growing in popularity across technology companies, across companies in general, where you're listening more to your customers, analyzing the insights, and pushing that towards either product teams or towards marketing sales teams, towards executive leadership, to really position the company's offering as something that fits the customer's needs. So we talked about how customers are more, I don't want to say demanding, but more informed and aware of what they could get, how they could get it, and why they should get it. And so customer success teams are hearing about this all the time from their customers, from their prospects, and bringing that information over to a marketing team who is able to position the offering a bit better, to a sales team who has to know that they are going to be creating contracts and invoices based on a subscription model. So maybe they want that brought to their CRM and not just into the ERP. And then, of course, executive leadership who's able to see these aggregated results and understand that they're at the brink of a huge amount of transformation. So it really touches every area of the organization. Of course, there's a bigger sway from the decision-making groups, from executive leadership who wants to undergo a transformation, but there's a push and a pull, and it's across the entire organization that we're seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that occurs to me is the differences in expectations from customers. If there's a services-based model in place, is going to then have to be understood, I suppose you'd say, and used as the basis for how you build that relationship with the customer, whether it's, like you said, in terms of a customer service or customer success department, or how salespeople are engaging with them, all the way through to, operational and delivery kinds of roles. Really changes all the way across, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And even in more minute things like how much the customer acquisition cost is, the customer retention costs, you would really think that a traditional model is easier for retention, but we're seeing that that's really not true. With a subscription model, the customers have an idea that they could leave at any time, but more often than not, they tend not to. So even with some of the potential cons that companies may have had, some of the hesitations, we're seeing that all across the departments, they are seeing proof otherwise that subscription is the way to go for the future.
One area that seems really important, and I mean, from the outside, it seems like it would be a real headache, is some of the legal and regulatory standards that have to be met. And you touched on a couple of them. Can you talk a little bit more about which regulations or which sort of legal obligations Binary Stream is focused on and why those are so important?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the US and North America in general, we have a couple of regulations here that really matter. They are ASC 606, which is more about revenue recognition and complying with your performance obligations. And then AAC 842, which is more oriented around leases. And I think that's an area that is emerging and becoming more and more ingrained in this entire topic. And of course, there's their international counterparts, IFRS 15 and IFRS 16. But on the revenue recognition side of things, if we try to understand and step back away from this topic, it's really about ensuring that what you write on paper that you made as a company is genuinely what you performed and you've met any obligations that you have to the customer before you recognize that revenue. Let's say, in a really easy example, that I'm offering cupcake once a month to everyone on my team, and they have to pay $10 a month for this cupcake as a service. If I say that I made $120 because I had one person sign up for the year, that's not necessarily true because I have to actually perform the obligation of delivering the cupcake to them and then paying the $10 before I can write down that I got the $10. Maybe they'll pay me upfront, but that doesn't mean necessarily that I've earned the revenue. And that's where we get concepts like unearned revenue and how you handle that with your software. And that's really where a solution like subscription billing suite and advanced subscription management come into play, where you are able to recognize your revenue properly without any of the hassle of trying to figure it out in Excel. On the side of leases, and that's where we start getting into a hardware and software mix, and that's AAC 842 or IFRS 16 internationally, there is an obligation to put your leases on the balance sheet. And that is more and more requiring customers and companies in general to have an accounting suite that includes any lease management capabilities that they have.
Yeah, and these, if I understand, these are needs that in the past had been, maybe limited to a smaller set of industries, and that goes to this whole conversation that these needs are really spreading to more and more cases, more and more industries.
Absolutely. It's kind of like a chicken or the egg. We see the financial management organizations and accounting standards organizations trying to catch up to industry trends and market trends. But at the same time, they're trying to set the tone proactively, and especially so over the past couple of years. But definitely with the rise of this model across different industries, there became a need to have just one standard, which is ASC 606 or IFRS 15, to manage all across these industries.
I wanted to turn the conversation to sort of the Microsoft ecosystem a bit more, obviously relevant to all of our listeners. And it's some of the things you've identified here are very much in line with what you hear from Microsoft's various industry teams and some of the priorities and how they like to position how technology can solve various problems. How would you describe what Microsoft's message has been on some of these themes to you and maybe to partners more broadly?
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. I think Microsoft is really ideally positioned to help companies across any different industry move towards this financial transformation and towards this subscription-oriented model. If we think about examples in the recent past, Microsoft recently acquired the licensing rights to our subscription billing suite on Dynamics 365 Finance. And really, the main motivator in that move was to help Microsoft position to industries across manufacturing, retail, healthcare, any of the other industry priorities, really make sure that there is a subscription service and capabilities in the core ERP platform that also connects to everything else that we have across the business application suite. So for us, as we're helping Microsoft build this scale, we're seeing that Microsoft has the capability to help on the front end, help on the back end. And we know that a big mantra for us within the Microsoft channel over the past year has been to eliminate the barriers between the front and back offices. And that is really what we're doing by connecting subscription billing suite to the core platform. we're enabling organizations to connect to D365 CE, to retail, to any e-commerce platform they have at the front, and then have all that upstream and downstream management of their billing fully centralized within D365 Finance. So that's creating a unified environment and interface for customers to use. That's creating more operational agility, and that's optimizing their financial models overall because they gain a lot more insights. Their financial health is a lot more in check. They can go to Power BI and look at an MRR report, see how their monthly performance is going. They can forecast a lot more accurately. And of course, they can make decisions and act on that data a lot more quickly. So it's really that idea of they can automate, they can analyze, and they can act upon all the data, all within the centralized environment of Dynamics 365 Finance.
All right. And how do Microsoft's partners prepare, or how are they adapting to using more of this technology to help roll this kind of approach out to clients?
I think systems integrators, consultants, really partners all across the grid are positioning themselves to be more capable in the subscription space. We're seeing a lot of companies come to us and ask for more training, more education on subscription. And through a lot of our strategic partnerships, I'll call out one in particular. For example, HSO is doing a lot of work on the subscription management side of things, where they are able to position themselves in that scale, learn more about what we do, and create a combined offering across Dynamics 365, across the ISV solutions, across more industry-oriented solutions, and really package that all together to help the customers see the value. And that's really what we're doing all together as a partner network. We have a lot more strength when we join together, where we collaborate and have a bit of a mind meld, where the systems integrator has that closer touch to the customer and they can inform us about what's going on with the customers. We have a bit more of a knowledge, I would say, and inherent expertise in the subscription side of things, thanks to our 15 years plus of working in this space. We can collaborate with Microsoft and really have that motherboard to put all the different pieces upon. And that environment of collaboration and shared knowledge and wisdom is really helping Microsoft and the Microsoft community at large really be so well positioned to take control of this area and, more importantly, help organizations and companies in it succeed.
Yeah, certainly. And for those organizations, well, I guess maybe we want to differentiate between the partners and perhaps some of the end user customer organizations. But how does Binary Stream recommend that organizations get started with some of these capabilities if they're really just taking the first step? And you can choose, whether you want to talk maybe about the sort of the organization embarking on this kind of a journey, or maybe for partners who are trying to ramp themselves up on becoming more versed in it.
I think both are wonderful areas to explore, and really it is critical to both end users and organizations that are looking to transform themselves, as well as agents of transformations and catalysts for transformations like our partners, to start learning more about it. We've actually already put a lot of programs in place. So companies like ourselves, where we are joining all this expertise and consolidating it for partners' usage, that's a great resource. Talking to Microsoft directly, we know that Microsoft has been really adding a lot of team power and a lot of resources to answer all of these questions that end users might have. But I would definitely say that doing the research is the first step. Looking at models like what we have, where you can look at your own transformation maturity, assess and introspect what your company goals are, and then talking to an expert like Binary Stream, like any of our industry partners, would help contextualize the value and see really tangible results, whether it is case studies, whether it is use cases from your own industry, and assess if this is the right time for you to transform. We know that it's going to happen to everyone, but it really does have to be at the right time, the right capability, the right team to make sure that this transformation project does succeed. I do think that this is a really important number because we're seeing it sometimes with companies. We know that 85% of finance teams are currently undergoing a financial transformation project. But at the same time, and this is a bit of a saddening stat to hear, 70% of financial transformation initiatives fail. So we're seeing that without the right resources, and I want to say this is not our own number, 70% is across the entire market, but that's because there are a lot of companies that maybe are not doing the right research, are not using the right tools that make it as efficient as possible. And that's why it's so important that before embarking on financial transformation, making sure that you have all the tools, having best of breed solutions like subscription billing suite in place helps have a smooth transition that does lead to success.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area, both in terms of the business opportunity and some of the technology that is required, like you said, to make it successful. I'd love to follow up and see how some of these trends have developed soon. But thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast and chat about it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on, Jason. It's been a pleasure chatting.
This has been another episode of the MSCW podcast. My thanks once again to Khaled Nassra of Binary Stream for joining. The firm recently completed a licensing agreement with Microsoft for their subscription billing suite. You can learn more about that at binarystream.com/MSFT-SBS, or just check out the links in the show notes. And that's it for this episode. If you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com, and follow us on Twitter and on LinkedIn for all of our updates. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.